and welcome to Escaping Kasterborous, the podcast where we rewatch, reminisce, and review everything Doctor Who from 2005 to present. My name is Rich, and I'm joined by someone who you'll kiss once, and she'll immediately look like a melted version of herself. It's Amy.
You're so rude to me.
I am, yeah, but you can't, sit there and be shocked at this point that I do that. It's...
A couple of times you've been nice to me.
I mean, last time I called you my fiancé because that's the case, but... Otherwise, I'm just going to slag you off. I mean, that's how our relationship... Anyone who knows us in person knows that that's how our relationship works. We just slag each other off. That's just how it goes. Welcome to the Shakespeare Code, episode 2 of series 3. Martha Jones's first sort of deeper foray into the TARDIS. Mm-hmm. And we've ended back in, 1599? Yes, 1599 Landan. And we're getting chased by sexy Shakespeare and a sexy witch.
Oi.
Chasing around sexy Martha and sexy David. So I guess
just a whole big bag of sexy.
Big bag of sexy. And yeah, we're just going to get the simping out of the way first because, yeah. It's what we do here.
It is. So...
I'm in this position, last week we just went on such a big tangent about all sorts of different things. That I'm like, I feel like there's something else we need to talk about first before we talk about the actual episode itself. But I apart from talking about Flux, there isn't really much else to talk about because we don't talk about Flux on this podcast because that's Modern Who. If you want to find out at least what my thoughts are on Modern Who, you can go to my YouTube channel. Just search for my name, and you should find me pulling YouTube thumbnail faces next to pictures of Jodie Whittaker.
Look at that cross promotion.
Yeah, look at me go. I can cross-promote all I like because everything we do is ours now and it's great.
Buzzing.
And it's wonderful.
No, I mean, we don't really want to talk about Flux because I feel like if we start talking about Modern Who, then we're going to get super confused for our audiences if we start darting around.
What? We'd have literally missed 10 series of Escaping Kasterborous to start talking about Flux.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Whoops.
Not yet, anyway.
No.
Maybe in 3 years' time when we eventually finish the podcast, it'll be caught up.
Yeah, God. Yeah. And then imagine that. Eventually Escaping Kasterborous will be a live, on the day kind of thing. But then what would I do first? Would I do my video review first, or would I do Escaping Kasterborous first? I'll probably do my video review first. No, you do the review first. And then we'd shoot Escaping Kasterborous the next day, for example.
Yeah.
But that is a long way down the line.
Hopefully by then, Russell will be back and everything will be great.
I'm pretty certain by the time we get through 10 series of Doctor Who on Escaping Kasterborous that Russell will be in. I mean, if we manage to stick to this weekly, then we'd be well away, but we don't. We don't because...
Never.
Yeah, and thankfully, as I've said, you guys don't ever get on to us about it, and we very much appreciate that. But anyway, let's talk about the Shakespeare Code.
The
Shakespeare Code. And honestly, the first thing about this episode that I'd forgotten even happened, which was something that we started talking about when we were watching this, was the fact that Martha references the colour of her skin almost immediately. And I had in my head, I'm like, I'm going to bring this up in the podcast if she doesn't. But she did mention the fact, obviously, Martha is a black character. Mm-hmm. Travelling back to 1599, I'm sure things weren't great for people of colour back in the day. No. I don't know my specifics of black history in the UK in the the 16th century. Je ne sais pas, quite frankly. But I assume that they didn't have it all good. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain I'm right.
Well, I'm pretty sure the fact that she says, "Are they going to cart me off to slavery?"
That probably gives you a bit of context.
Contextualizes the kind of era that we're in for this episode. But I don't know enough about black history because do schools teach that? Lol.
No.
So
I don't remember what I learnt in history at school.
Neither do I.
all I remember is I had a moderately fit teacher for history in my first sort of 2 years of school.
I had a fit geography teacher who, strangely enough, looked a lot like David Tennant. Anyway.
Well.
But yeah, skin colour.
Yeah, that was it. I'm thinking about my old history teacher. So Martha brings this up straight away and goes, am I going to get carted away and whatnot? And as I said, wasn't expecting that, or I don't remember that being sort of mentioned, because it's such a passing thing. It's a contextual question that I'm sure people who are aware of things like that, obviously back in 2007 when this aired, the 7th of April 2007.
Ooh, we're in 2007 now.
We probably weren't all that aware of sort of,
No, I mean, we were 12.
What's the word? Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of the
Prejudice.
word. Prejudice.
Discrimination.
Just that's the word. Discrimination. Yeah. I was going to say in-diversity, but I don't know why that completely. No. I don't know why that left me. Racial discrimination back in that time, because we were 12.
Well, exactly.
We were. I mean, I can't speak for you, Amy, but I was lucky enough to have grown up with people that never had that come to the forefront when I was at school. We had people of colour at school, and nothing ever happened.
I don't think I've ever witnessed racial discrimination firsthand, which is obviously a very good thing.
Very lucky position to be in, to be honest, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, no. So I never really I think we've just been raised by good people that never we never believed that people of colour were any different to us. So therefore, when she asked the question, as an adult, you can kind of sit there and be like, I understand why they have to ask this question, because you're kind of putting it forwards in an era where slavery was clearly a thing. So yeah, it kind of, like you said, it kind of contextualizes it, but also for the adults watching, it basically kind of, like you said, they brush over it a little bit, but then to be fair, they do come back to it later in the episode a few times when Shakespeare...
Well, they mention, obviously, Martha's skin colour, and he does make... Obviously, he doesn't fully lean into it, but there are things said that I wouldn't say you wouldn't get away with, but they're very much sort of diluted replacements for words that could have been used.
Oh, very much so.
It's like saying, fiddlesticks or frick instead of those words. It's basically the same kind of thing, but brushing over that was interesting. And obviously the fact that when it cuts to the Globe Theatre, you do see black people in the crowd, and it's like, obviously nowadays people don't, well, I say people, usually those who are more swung towards the right or would like things to be represented as they were, would normally turn around and be like, yeah, this isn't right. If I had to compare it to something that I'm more involved in that regard, things like video games, when they were showing off things like Call of Duty and Battlefield, it's like, look, here's a woman with a prosthetic arm on the battlefields of World War II. And everyone kind of goes,
that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen. Black soldiers were present, but obviously probably not as much as they're represented in video games nowadays. I mean, so it's like people look at it and go, no, that's not right.
I'm all for representation, obviously, because, representation is an incredible, amazing thing. And for people who see themselves in people in the media, it really does have the power to change people's lives and perceptions and stuff. But I feel like if you're doing something that is critically time specific, so like World War I or World War II, then you need to portray it as it was, which was basically all white men, because they were the people who were drafted into war. That's not to say that representation shouldn't be a thing, because it absolutely should. But
sometimes
it's just
there's a time and a place.
If you're going for something historically accurate, then you should make it historically accurate.
Doctor Who has touched upon it, but it's never fully lent into it. I mean, I say that, I'm telling a lie. Rosa, when Ryan gets slapped by that white man. And then also something I mentioned, I forgot about that when we were watching that, but I said to Amy during the episode, I said Thin Ice, when Bill gets sort of racially profiled by that bloke, and the Doctor just waltzes up and smacks him one. Fair enough. That's as far as they go in Doctor Who. And again, this is I sincerely doubt people who think Doctor Who's overly woke won't be listening to this podcast, but that's another argument as to why it's like, this isn't anything new in Doctor Who. This is something they've always been aware of.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Even down to, for example, when Martha and the Doctor are stood watching the play right at the beginning, and she points out the fact that obviously they're men dressed up as women, because women didn't perform back then, and she says, there's men dressed as women, and the Doctor says London never changes. And obviously that's Russell, just like
It's
that's
such
Russell
a
through
Russell
and
joke,
through.
isn't it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that humor coming back.
Yeah, me
I
too.
really am. That's sort of really. It's not even like. I was saying inflammatory. It's not. It's not necessarily boundary pushing. It's not really risque. It's just humor at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
It's never meant in bad taste because it's coming from Russell T Davies.
I was going to say, isn't Russell part of the LGBT?
Yeah, he's a gay man himself.
Yeah, so it's kind of... Oh, bollocks, my phone's
Amy!
Sorry.
What are you like?
Sorry.
This is why we blokes always have our phones on silent.
Sorry.
That's the point. Question for you guys in listening. Put it on Twitter at Kasterpod. Do you have your phone on silent all the time like me?
No.
I set a ringtone. I set tones for everything, but I never hear them because it's never switched on.
Weirdo. Anyway, I've lost my point. I've totally lost.
This is why you put
point.
your phone on silent, Amy.
What
Russell T Davies, part of LGBT himself.
A lot of people are expecting that when he comes back to Doctor Who, that it's going to be just like a big gay flamboyant like show, and I'm kind
people
of
are just thinking
it's
I mean, there's a lot of people thinking that one of the characters from It's a Sin is going to get cast as the Doctor, which I haven't seen It's a Sin, and I don't know. And I'm also like, I almost don't care who gets cast as the Doctor, because as long as the writing's good and they write the character well, then by all means I'm for it.
As long as the actor is good. But then, to be fair, I've heard so many good things about It's a Sin, and I really do want to watch it.
I mean, they literally recreated Resurrection of the Daleks' first Dalek scene in It's a Sin.
Did they?
Yeah. Was it It's a Sin or was it Years and Years? I think it was It's a Sin. Yeah, right. Yeah, genuinely. I saw this thing, and I was like, I think I saw it on Twitter. It was just a whole clip of it, and it's literally I don't know whether I've even shown you Resurrection of the Daleks, which is a Peter Davison story.
Maybe.
Right, the first Dalek scene is basically the Daleks latching onto the ship, and there's all these people, all these guys, because it's like a prison ship, because Davros is on it, and they all like barricade this door. They pull down this big black screen, like a big door. They pull it down, they all take cover, and then the Daleks blow through the wall, and there's a little bit of a firefight. Some people die, some Daleks die, and then everyone sort of retreats. And they recreated that in It's a Sin, and I saw it pop up on Twitter, and I was like, if somebody's parodying this, why specifically this?
Wait, and when you say they recreated it, do you mean like as if they were watching it on TV?
It's a Sin like I think It's a Sin set in like the 80s anyway.
Yeah, it's set during like the AIDS pandemic.
I think it must be that the characters are cast in this show.
Right. And
yeah, so basically Russell took Resurrection of the Daleks and basically recreated that scene as closely as he could in It's a Sin. And I saw it on Twitter and was like, I at the time I didn't know it was Russell, but I was like, why would you parody this specific scene? Because it's not exactly an iconic Doctor Who scene.
No.
But also, the effort gone through to make it look like it did, it's like, wow, that's wicked.
I'll have to watch it. It's been on my to-watch list for a while.
So Russell coming back won't immediately re-gay everything. Because as much as there's a lot of sort of progressive undertones to the Russell era, which we've spoken about a lot, we'll continue to speak about because they're always present, it's never so on the nose flamboyantly woke. No, I feel like if you'd have aired Doctor Who from 2005 onwards today, like first time, you'd have people whinging about it being woke.
Oh, of course you would. I mean, it's like I said to you, and people Jesus, can't get my words out. People constantly moan in this day and age that, it's PC, it's also politically
it's
correct.
Pandering, yeah.
It's like, well, it's not, because I mean, literally in 2007 you've got Martha fighting the fact that Shakespeare's calling her racial slurs, and people say that it's PC.
You've got Captain Jack, who's very blatantly, I wouldn't even say he's gay, I think he's just pan.
But it's just one of those things. It's like Doctor Who has always been on like trying to be as like progressive as possible.
I wouldn't even say trying. It's just progressive.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. Like, back in when it was first conceived in the 1960s, it obviously wasn't quite as progressive back then. But then as time evolved,
Doctor Who has been progressive because the first producer of the show was a woman, and that was unheard of back in '63.
Yeah, that's true.
Verity Lambert. So
no, what I was going to say was the only time that I felt the progressive stance fell a bit flat on his face was during Bill and Capaldi when she was just every single episode in her script. It was written that she had to state she was gay.
Point out that she was gay.
It's kind of like,
that's something I'm intrigued to look back on for series 10, because that, as you say, without getting too much into it, that was something that annoyed me. Is the fact that, yes, Bill was a great character, liked her way more than I thought I would, because her first like promo thing, which was just a chunk taken from the pilot, which was the first episode, what their first episode was called, was series 10.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, she's really annoying. But in reality, I really liked it. But yeah, it was one of her big flaws. But that's more on on Moffat's part.
Moffat. I was going to say that's more on Moffat, kind of constantly writing it into a script. It's like
because
there are ways to do it, like how Russell T Davies does it in this episode, where he says to, where the Doctor says to Shakespeare and Martha, he goes, "Oi, there's enough time for flirting later," and Shakespeare goes, "Oh, is that a promise, Doctor?" And he goes, "Oh, 57 academics just punched the air." It's like a joke like that, because you are then sort of making a joke about how the academics like speculate that Shakespeare might have been bisexual, and therefore they're making a joke. It's like, oh look, he might have been bisexual.
But it's like even the Chibnall era, for all of its flaws, its inclusion and its how progressive it's been has been really good. And yes, there have been things where it's fallen flat on its arse. I mean, when you said about an example specifically where I think that sort of commentary approach has gone a bit too far, was I thought you were going to talk about Orphan 55 or Praxius.
Oh, no.
Because obviously the narratives of that fell very much into the trap of let's try and be a bit too I feel like that was just
Chibnall trying to be a bit clever, and it's
not even just Chibnall, because I don't think they were written. Orphan 55 wasn't written by him, and I don't. think Praxius
it was written by. I can't remember who.
I can't remember the name either.
I was listening to Nerd Cube's podcast, and he said that the writer who wrote Orphan 55 wrote another episode of something that was also really, really rubbish, and I was like, why doesn't that surprise me that he wrote Orphan 55 then?
But yeah, so yeah, I know we kind of got on this tangent a lot on this podcast about the sort of the woke, the anti-woke army getting all up in arms about things. But yeah, it's always been present. And the fact that they did touch upon Martha's skin colour in this, and obviously it is brought up again and again, because at the end of the day, it would be. But they tackled it.
They handled it well. They
tackled it well, yeah, very much so. I mean, like I said, they could have done what they did in Series 10 and just had some guy properly racially profiling Bill and the Doctor smacking him one. And then, obviously, there was a much more semi-hands-off approach in Rosa when Ryan gets smacked and the Doctor just sort of takes a step back, because it's like, you just got slapped by a white man as a black man, and I am a woman, or at least I appear female, so I'm not gonna get involved. If that were like Capaldi, it probably would have been a different story.
I mean, if that were anyone, like
yeah, but
anyway, yeah.
That's how that was. But speaking of Martha specifically, I just want to put a really big date on this episode. Really big date. It's something that popped up to me that I didn't remember her saying, and a very weird, a sort of strange thing to bring up, and that's Martha asking whether the Doctor has a mini disc so they could film stuff. Because back in 2007, that would have been the sort of days that, mini disc was a thing.
Well, weren't MP3 players a thing back in 2007?
MP3 players were definitely present. The iPod, the iPhone came out in 2007, so the iPod was already out. So MP3 players were still present, but I think the problem with it is obviously downloading music and people's access to the internet and having computers, even back then. That was still an interesting concept. So the idea of physical media was obviously still very much present.
It'd be really interesting to sit like a young person down in front of it now, and when she goes, "We got a mini disc or something," and they go, "What's a mini disc?"
What's a mini disc? I mean, admittedly, I think it almost feels like they've dropped that in to be like, this is the next big thing. But mini disc fell flat on its arse. I only have 2 examples of mini discs being used in my daily life.
Yeah.
And
maybe.
do you have any? Did you ever use mini discs?
No, I don't think I did, because I wasn't a particularly tech interested child. Like, my dad obviously worked in IT when we were younger, so he kind of had the newfangled. I remember he came going slightly off the subject, but on the topic of computers and technology, when Windows 98 first came out, or not long after it came out, Windows 2000, sometime around then, Dad was like, sorting out the computer in the living room, and he was going, "Oh, this is going to make the PC boot much faster." And as a kid, I went, "Oh, what? Will it boot in like 3 seconds?" And Dad went, "Yeah, it will." And then it still took like obviously an age, and I went, "Dad, this isn't 3 seconds. You lied to me."
Wow.
And I just distinctly remember being so upset that the computer didn't boot in 3 seconds.
Mate, I was excited when my dad upgraded or got a new computer and it could turn itself off.
Yeah.
Back in the days when it came with a big orange text saying you can now shut down your computer and have to turn the power button off yourself. Mate, that was mind-blowing. But anyway, yeah, mini discs were like, I would say they're way ahead of their time. It was just a different format, but the difference with mini discs was they could store like metadata that could be displayed, so like song titles and stuff like that, whereas like a CD player, at least back then, unless you had a super duper one, don't quote me on my history of the knowledge of CD formats, couldn't. Or at least nothing that I had could. So we had a back in 2007 time, around that time, we had a Volvo XC90, a car still going very strong today. We used to have one of them, like a big 4x4, and in that car, it had a mini disc player alongside a CD player. Because it had like a little screen on the dashboard, one of those ones that back in the day would have been, wow, look at that massive screen. It's got so many pixels. Obviously single color, just a basic printed LCD. It was like, wow, this is wicked. And beneath it had a mini disc player, so it could play mini discs. And I think my dad must have made maybe 2 or 3 mini discs, because it was like, well, we've got CDs. Nobody releases music on a mini disc as far as I'm aware. Mini discs are like writable formats.
I think I must have held a mini disc at some point, but I don't think I've ever actually like owned one.
I always remember them being red, or like a reddy pink colour. Yeah. So we had that, and then we actually had we had like the next generation XC90 afterwards, and it just didn't. You couldn't get it with the mini disc player because it had already died. Like that format was dead.
I mean, ours just went kind of straight from tape cassette to CD, and then from that point on, it was just kind of like digital everything.
iPods,
really.
Yeah. I mean, the only other time I saw it in play was with my background of dance. In case you didn't know, trained dancer. Hence why my username on Twitter is so strange. They're tap steps. Fun fact. When I used to go and do competitions when I was growing up, all the dance schools used to stick to things like cassettes because they are so much more
reliable.
They're reliable than a CD, because you scratch a CD, it's gone.
Yeah.
And when you're charging around doing dance competitions, no one takes care of anything. And tapes you can chuck around. You can have tapes that you've absolutely buggered in the past. You can just screw them all back in, and Bob's your uncle, it works again. CDs, you're screwed. So we stuck to cassettes like glue. And there was one dance school there at my competitions that I used to go to in Doncaster who did use mini discs. So their entire school had all of their music that they used for their dances, because somebody would go, actually, at this festival, you would take your music with you to go on stage to do your dance, to perform for the adjudicator and take part in the competition, and you had to hand them your music for them to play it. So it's like, I would go to my teacher on the side of the stage with my cassette. This school would obviously go to the dressing room, get all the dances that they needed all on mini discs.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'd be fascinated to know whether they're still using them now. But I could just very vividly remember seeing. Yeah, but they still, like I said, they still use cassettes. They still use cassettes.
I mean,
because my dance school is still stuck in the early noughties/90s. Like I said, reliability.
Yeah,
they sound like ass, but they're reliable. But
that's true.
Mini discs immediately dating this episode quite a bit, and I'd completely forgotten that was even a thing.
So we're 25 minutes in, and so far we've literally talked about 2 things.
We've talked about woke and mini discs. Because, I mean, after looking on Twitter, and people have said, like, you know what, you guys go off on these weird tangents, and I think everyone's game for it.
I mean, it's virtually impossible not to. Like, if you try and stick to one topic, it's kind of hard.
We still talk about the episode, but at the end of the day, sometimes you just go off on a tangent and talk rubbish, and that's what podcasts are for. We're here to talk rubbish. Let's talk about Shakespeare, shall we?
Yes.
Dean Lennox Kelly.
I said to you when he came on stage, I was like, he just looks like a prick, doesn't he? But
he
then
does.
I don't know if that's
he looks like that very self-centered, obnoxious character, and there's an essence of that in this Shakespeare, but obviously that subversion of the expectation of him coming out and going, oh, doth, etc. bollocks and whatever, and obviously he says, shut your big fat mouths. Yeah. Egads. And
Yeah.
with the fact that the Doctor builds it up and goes, this is going to be really good eloquence and everything. And he goes, you're all bellends.
Yeah, basically.
Or whatever. And that I've always enjoyed that. But as much as you say, he has got this
air
aura.
of prickery.
Air of prickery. It does sound like a title. Hello, I'm
The
Amy, Air of Prickery.
Oh. I'm Shakespeare, the air of prickery.
He is still a clever, mature character, and it's such a. It's almost like they've taken both sides of how you would present that character, and they just ran with both of them. Mm-hmm. They said, let's have this juxtaposition of what you expect of being this very, very well-spoken, very particular, very mature. I say mature. I've already said that word, but the educated character, and instead let's throw in this roguish, like a Guy Ritchie feeling Shakespeare. But actually, let's put them both together and do something with it, because you like this character of Shakespeare.
Yeah, I mean,
whereas
I feel
if
like
they'd played it out, if he were the heir of prickery, you wouldn't like him.
No, I feel like in the first few minutes he comes on and you sort of think, oh, he's a bit of a dick, isn't he? Especially with the way he kind of is like flirting with the barmaid, and then all of a sudden Martha comes in and he's like, oh, hello. It's kind of like, oh, great, we've got a little bit of a slut on our hands, have we? But then after that, you realise that actually that side of him is probably just a bit of a show, and he's actually just trying to kind of cover up, like, as we discover after his son died, trying to cover up like the grief from dealing with that, and he probably just puts on this kind of persona, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
He puts on this persona of this kind of like, oh, I'm going to go around and sleep with all the women because I'm Shakespeare and I'm gorgeous and I'm clever, and then really, I think it kind of takes him meeting the Doctor and establishing that back and forth with him to see that probably there's a bit more to things than just like this facade that he's got going on, which is why evidently he turns out to not be such a horrendous like personality as you think he's going to be. And yeah, you do end up liking it, and to be fair, it's pretty instantaneous. Like, there isn't really a point in the episode where I think I don't like you. They maybe once upon a time there was, when I was a bit younger and I didn't really understand the kind of approach and the character, but they somehow managed to deep dive into Shakespeare's character without actually what's the word I'm looking for? I can never think of words. I'm no Shakespeare, put it like that. Without kind of deconstructing his character or
like too explicitly.
Yeah. But they don't actually deconstruct Shakespeare himself. Like, did Shakespeare actually have a son that died? Right, yep. Okay, fair enough. I, again, don't know history.
Because it's a historical character, they, apart from the super extraterrestrial stuff that's very much fictional, obviously Doctor Who has always tried to be, because it's still wearing that part of its initial conception of being a historically accurate television show. Mm-hmm. They still wear that. So yeah, things like that, did happen. He did have a son called Hamnet. That died at 11 years old.
Did he write? Did Shakespeare write Hamlet? Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Hence why Martha was like Hamnet. What?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know huge amounts of Shakespeare. I studied Romeo and Juliet, which I really enjoyed. I studied Othello, which I thought was boring.
I don't remember studying any Shakespeare at school, which is really bad because we probably did.
Well.
But.
I mean, admittedly, I did technically do a study on Doctor Who when I was at school. I did a media... Was that a mock exam? It might have been a mock exam, actually.
Probably.
And funnily enough, we watched a section from Last of the Time Lords at the end of Series 3. With the Master and all the rockets and the Doctor flying, getting out of his cage. Yeah, we watched that and we had to analyse it.
Fair.
And I'll talk
Bet you
more
were in
about
your
that once we get to that episode. Yeah, I was. As soon as it started, it was like, it's Doctor Who.
Oh my
yes, I know this. But yeah, so speaking of language, Steph has a question for us regarding language. With all of Tennant's era, but this episode in particular, there's a huge focus on the power of words, and the dialogue is on point. Mm-hmm. What do you think Chibnall misses that means his dialogue just doesn't land as well?
Talent.
And there's one I think you know when you get a shiver like somebody stepped on your grave. That's just happened to Chibnall. Jesus, Amy.
Stabbed him right through the heart. That did.
You've got the DNA replicator.
No, I mean he's clearly got some form of talent if he's made his way into.
Well, he's had his
BBC
moments, and he did Broadchurch. So
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, exactly. So he's not talented, like, but I think. What were you going to say? You answer first, because I need time to think.
Yeah, I think in a show as has so much momentum as Doctor Who, it has its slower moments, but then there's just always this energy present, unless it really has to be deliberately sucked out of a room. But he's very good at managing to do that using his character's dialogue. I mean, bless him, Ryan. For 2 series, he's useless. He says nothing.
I feel like
he points out the blatantly obvious, and he contributes basically nothing.
Ryan basically exists to be the episode's exposition, doesn't he? To be honest,
I mean, so does everyone. But there's literally it's a really good question, Steph, because this episode in particular, and I don't know whether this has come up because you've watched it again and thought, oh, actually, it's the scene when the Doctor's working out why there's 14 sides of the Globe Theatre, because he's bouncing off other characters, and I think that's what keeps the momentum moving, so you stay with it more. Whereas if it were Chibnall writing that scene for Jodie, the camera would be focused on Jodie and just Jodie, and she's given a whole list of things to go through in her script, a load of dialogue, and she's just told to go along with it and just have to do something. Hence why so many of her scenes of her working stuff out being expositional all sound the same, because I feel like she's been thrown in the deep end and she's gone, right, here's a page of dialogue, go. And it's like, Jodie's a good actress, but she's probably not that good. Like even David, when he goes off on one, like, and he's saying like, 14 shapes, numbers, sides, like, and then somebody else jumps in, sort of restarts his sort of
train of thought.
Not especially train of thought, but his sort of like his window for dialogue. Whereas Jodie gets through about a quarter of what she needs to say, and she's lost us because everything's just focused on her. Whereas in this, it's bouncing between the Doctor and Shakespeare, the Doctor and Martha, the Doctor and Shakespeare, then Martha, then Shakespeare, then the Doctor, and whatever. It just keeps on moving, and all the stuff that is explained. Like if for example you took one of Jodie's, one of those scenes of her working something out, and then just extracted the base bullet points of this is what's been explained, this is what we now understand, and so on, and you put it next to one of Tennant's, you'd have the same amount out of it. But the scene would A, probably be shorter, and B, would probably feel shorter, because every single facet of that scene, the set, the other characters in the room, the camera work, for goodness sake.
It's the pacing as well.
It all leads into how well that kind of stuff is actually portrayed. Whereas with, like, hence why the scene in War of the Sontarans with the Doctor lecturing the General and Mrs. Seacole,
that felt
worked so well, because
good.
It felt like a Russell T Davies era exposition dump, because it jumped between other people and it kept things snappy, like a lot of Chibnall stuff. And again, I don't think it's on Jodie Whittaker per se, because I think she's given a bunch of dialogue and gone and said, go. Off you go. Get this across to the viewer in the most interesting way possible. And she on the spot literally does the noise she does anyway, which is and just goes on with it. That's why the dialogue works so well during this era, because every single thing is being used. But it feels like Chibnall falls into that trap that, again, we'll cover this when we get to that era, that Moffat falls into so much with the Doctor. And I saw a clip of a Capaldi Doctor and was like, this is something I genuinely despise about the Doctor during that era, is the fact the Doctor's so good.
Yeah, during the end.
And they just have to lead into the fact the Doctor's so good. Not even at the end. It was probably omnipresent from about series 6 onwards. And it's touched upon in Time Lord Victorious in Waters of Mars. But otherwise, there's this expectation for the Doctor to just be good, like how Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock is just good. And I think a lot of that probably leaked into Moffat's era of Who,
I mean,
which didn't
Moffat's
help
obviously writes Sherlock, doesn't he? So that's going to be like
hence why series 6 and 7 had gaps in them so they could go and make Sherlock in the process.
See, I think my answer to that question would be that, like, Chibnall has grown up alongside a lot of Doctor Who. He said himself that he used to be a fan of the show when he was a kid.
There's literally a clip of him on TV criticising it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
which he's
when he was
been absolutely ripped to shreds for. It's like, you criticising Doctor Who, don't think that's okay.
People in glass houses.
Yeah, but I think the problem with Chibnall is that he's not trying to understand what makes a good episode of Doctor Who. I think he's trying too hard to fit too much in to basically every episode he's ever written. I think if you look at the episodes that guest writers have written for Chibnall's era, which tend to be the better ones, like Rosa and Demons of the Punjab, and the most recent episode, The Angels.
The Haunting of Villa Diodati and Maxine Alderton.
The Village of Angels, that kind of thing. It's all guest writers who have written other kind of horror-y, sci-fi, but also like historical text or like TV shows, that kind of thing. So one of the writers for one of the really good episodes of Chibnall's era was a soap writer. Now, I personally don't think that soaps are a particularly good form of TV. I think they're a bit trash. I think they're a bit cringe.
They work for some people,
but
but
they're
very much
so
not for us.
popular. So obviously, you've got to have talent to be able to write that kind of day-to-day life goes by script. But I think Chibnall just tries to do too much because he's trying to be the Doctor Who writer that he was a fan of when he was a kid. He's trying to be too Russell. He's trying to be too Moffat. And he's not really looking at it and thinking, right, what would make the pacing of this episode work? And I think what Russell does so well that Moffat kind of doesn't in places, and Chibnall definitely doesn't, is Russell kind of writes his episodes more like character studies. I mean, we've discussed this a lot in the past with episodes like Boomtown and... Is it Boomtown?
Yeah, and Girl in the Fireplace.
Yeah, they're very much character studies, but they've got this kind of basic plot that goes underneath them. But I think that's why they work so well and why the writing hits a lot better, because he's not trying to squeeze in too much plot, because the problem is you can't have a balance of everything. You can't have like lots of plot and lots of good dialogue. You kind of have to have like a middle ground on both, and that's why like this episode works so well, because the plot is literally go to 1599 London, realise there's witches, try and stop the witches. That's the whole plot of this episode. That is literally it, yeah. But that's all it needs to be, because you have enough detail in there of Shakespeare, who Shakespeare is, the people in the madhouse, who they are, why the witches are who they are, like the power of words. And that's the kind of character elements that you get in Russell's writing, like with It's a Sin and TV shows that he's done since then, that are so well written, because he focuses more on who the people are and not what they're doing. Whereas Chibnall, I mean, I'm not being funny, right? But somebody said, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said that in the most recent episode, we've learnt more about Claire than we have about Yaz. And Yaz has been the longest running companion of New Who. Just let that sink in for a minute. Yaz has been on the show for longer than Rose was, longer than Martha was, longer than Donna, longer than Bill, longer than Clara. And what do we know about her? She's a police officer, but barely. What else do we know about her? Not a lot.
She tried to run away once.
Oh, great. Boo-hoo. Like, it kind of is like... Don't get me wrong, I have sympathy and all that, but I don't know enough about Yaz. We didn't know bloody sod all about Ryan, apart from the fact that he couldn't climb a ladder. And
yeah, very, very temperate. Temperate. What's the word?
Are you okay? You broken?
I'm really bad at words today. Not good for when you're on a podcast. Temperamental dyspraxia. That's the word.
But like, because sometimes he was fine and he could shoot a bomb through a basketball hoop from like 3 miles away, but couldn't look at things straight or something. I don't know. Like, their characters just aren't fleshed out because all Chibnall tries to focus on is the action of Doctor Who and not the people of Doctor Who.
I wouldn't even say it's necessarily the action. I think after you were saying that about how he writes, I mean, I can't speak for you specifically, but I know I have, and I'm sure people who are listening have always drummed up ideas as to what they would do as their own Doctor Who episode. If they had the ability to write an episode of Doctor Who genuinely, what would they do? And if you're coming up with an original concept or coming up with some kind of follow-up, because, I mean, if it were up to me, I would write some kind of sequel to Remembrance of the Daleks because I love it so much, or just revitalise the Dalek Civil War, which was kind of touched upon in Revolution of the Daleks. But anyway, I find myself coming up with a concept, an idea, and having to justify each and every facet of it, which I think is why Chibnall's writing sometimes leans so much into having to explain stuff, because it feels like he needs to make sure that everyone knows why he's doing what he's doing, so people can't question it.
Yeah,
and I can, and from a big as much as I'm not a writer, at least not in that sense, I can write scripts and stuff like, well, YouTube scripts. And admittedly, I've written plays before. I say plays. I've done theatre stuff.
Amateur plays.
Yeah, amateur theatre. I can understand why he sort of does what he does, because if I've ever conceived an idea for a show, for an episode or a character to introduce into an episode, I you know, as much as when you write a character, you need to write a whole backstory for them, even if that never gets like told in certain depth. But if somebody asked you something about that character or something happened in the show to that character, you had the character's own personal Bible to refer back to.
Yeah.
So it always feels like you do need to write, you do need to flesh out certain decisions, certain settings, certain creatures, certain motivations to make them feel justified in the story you're trying to tell. And it feels like a lot of that ended up on the script, on the page, alongside the other ideas that Chibnall had, because he felt like he needed to prove to the Doctor Who fan base that he knew what he was doing. And I think that is his downfall.
I think part of it as well is the fact that he has never
Righted.
English. I was going to say written. He's never written for children. Whereas Russell had, Moffat had, like, all the people that have done New Who before Chibnall have written for children. Now, I'm not saying that Doctor Who is a children's show. It is a family show.
I do dislike that people call it a children's show.
My point is that Russell and Moffat have the experience of what appeals to the wider audience, including children. So there are nods that you can make to the kids that the kids will get. There are nods you can make to the adults that the adults will get. But generally, everything is on a kind of medium ground, which everyone of any age will understand. I feel like the problem with Chibnall having never written for kids is the fact that he doesn't understand how to write for kids. And so he's gone too much the other way, tried too hard to explain everything, kind of like you were saying, he feels like he needs to justify everything. But does he feel like he needs to justify everything for the fandom, or does he feel like he needs to justify everything so that the kids understand what's going on? I feel like that also doesn't
everything
help.
For himself.
Exactly, because he's basically trying to protect all angles, but also have like, oh, Kiddy Winkies, did you understand what happened in that episode? Yeah, because Yaz and Ryan bloody explained it all. Like, whereas the sort of people our age who grew up on New Who with Russell and Moffat not explaining everything, you know, Russell explained enough, but I feel like you don't need that exposition to understand what's going on. Like, I know that we're not really talking about the most recent episodes and stuff, but she sonicked a rock. You didn't need to sonic a rock. You could have just looked at the rock and the broken window and understood that a rock was thrown through the window. Like, that's the kind of bit where I feel like Chibnall was like, oh, we need to get the Sonic out because the kids like the Sonic. And it's kind of like, why?
We could sell more Sonic screwdrivers because who would buy one of those?
Yeah.
I have one. The only Sonic I don't have, actually, is Capaldi's.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I should have one.
Probably, because you've got Eccleston / David's.
Yeah, and I've got Matt Smith's.
You've got Matt's, and I've got Jodie's.
But I don't have.
I think I've got it right here, actually. I do.
Mine are somewhere. They're in a drawer somewhere, but anyway. Yeah, so that's... so, Steph, yeah, that was a very, very good question, and it tied in very nicely to something I was going to bring up anyway regarding that scene with the Doctor working out why the Globe Theatre is shaped as it is. And that was our, thank you for coming into our TED Talk about scripting, our scripting masterclass. And
From writers.
As I said in my in an episode of Ups and Downs for one of the episodes of Series 12, it must have been, I mentioned about how my script writing tutor, or at least one of my tutors at uni who was a script writer through and through, basically, if I remember rightly, don't quote me on this, and please don't take this as fact if you are going into script writing, that you could basically take out every other line of a script and it would still read the same, or it still would get across the same idea, because you'd almost overwrite and then take stuff out, whereas Chibnall just feels like he put that straight in.
Yeah, and
like,
that's kind of why
I've written this down,
him...
and it all ended up in the episode. And the thing that I found funny when I put that episode of Ups and Downs out is that loads of people in the comments on Who Culture were like, "Yo, are you talking about Clifton?" Because they knew what university I went to, and they potentially do that course now. And they go, "He's talking about Clifton. Hello, Clifton. I know you're not listening. Unless you are, in which case, hi."
Hello, if any of our old uni tutors are listening, lol, look where we ended up.
I even see a Traction logo on the wall in my in the basement of the Ellen Terry building in Coventry that says, like, "Look, Rich went to go work for Traction."
And Amy didn't do anything with her degree because she sucks.
Well, I didn't want to say it, but okie dokie then.
Lol. I don't suck. I just, no.
You don't suck.
Anyway.
It's okay. Let's not talk about Amy's, existential crisis. Let's talk about Doctor Who.
I was going to say something and I can't remember what it was. It was something
We're good at this
about,
today, aren't we?
Yeah. It was something about, no, it's gone. I think it was regarding the guy in the mental hospital and how well that was handled. I really liked the way that the Doctor kind of went into his mind and like kind of backtracked on himself, if that makes sense. I don't know what I'm saying. How about we just forget I said anything and carry on?
Yeah, I was completely lost there.
I was basically going to say that we haven't up to this point seen much of the Doctor using his abilities to kind of go into other people's minds, have we?
Well, he uses it on Renette.
Yeah.
In Madame Pomfrey.
Yeah. But that's kind of the only instance of it we've seen. Like,
and it is quite good that they use it quite sparingly. I mean, it happened most recently in Village of the Angels, and it happens in Orphan 55 as well, but we don't see it tons. It's almost something you forget the Doctor can do.
That was kind of one thing that I disliked about Matt Smith's Doctor, the way Moffat wrote it, is the fact that he was going around headbutting people. I know that Matt Smith's Doctor was supposed to be a bit more comical because that's when the American audience started kind of like tuning into it, and that's the kind of humour that maybe they gel a bit more with. But it's also kind of like, I don't understand why you had to take that gentler side of the Doctor and make it comical. Like, I really like the fact that Chibnall has brought it back to being purely a sort of means to communicate quite sparingly.
It is this maturity.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always respected about the Russell era with the character of the Doctor, and even down to like the Doctor's theme. When you listen to the Doctor's theme in the Russell era, because obviously 9s and 10s Doctor theme were the same.
Yeah. It
was that, that falsetto ooh all the time. I'm not going to do it now, but yeah.
No.
No, not that one. And I love that. It left that really, that mysterious side to the Doctor, and as much as obviously it became, as you say, the sort of action hero feeling with Matt Smith's I Am the Doctor theme song, which is obviously iconic at this point, but it was horrendously overplayed. And yeah, this is something I'm going to do. I will talk about more in depth when it comes around to talking about Russell's era.
Maybe you should do a YouTube channel, like a YouTube video diving into the music of Doctor Who and how it.
Maybe I should.
How it evolves.
Maybe I should. Yeah,
I think that'd be quite interesting.
Why it was good Murray Gold was replaced. That is blasphemy to some people, but I was quite happy that Murray Gold was replaced with Sega Nakanola, because
I mean, to a point.
Bless him. It may not be down to Murray Gold's decisions. Obviously, where the music goes in the episode and how much it's used is not necessarily up to him.
Not his choice, probably.
But yeah, he did do it for about 12 years.
Yeah.
12, 13 years of Doctor Who.
I mean, he's a fantastic composer. Like, absolutely incredible.
But his early stuff was definitely better than his newer stuff. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as we said, not in terms of plot. Excuse me, hiccup. In terms of plot, not a huge amount really happens. But because of the character study of Shakespeare and exploring the Doctor and Martha, obviously that scene in the hotel room where Martha's very much like she's giving him the Hakuna Matata's eyes. Always have to go with that. And the Doctor's just talking about Rose, and Martha gets really stroppy.
Yeah,
I think you said like Martha's got no right to get stroppy about that.
It was because she was doing the whole "we're here in the same bed alone," and it's like Martha, like he's literally trying to work out a mystery. You need to give him a minute. You're not gonna have sex with him. Sorry, but you're not. And when he's like, Rose would know, and she gets all stroppy, it's like I think I said something like, "Oh, give over, Martha. You don't have the right to get stroppy," because she doesn't.
You've just met him. You want to rail him. It's
just met him.
It's as if you've met this hot bloke at a party. You both, or like he's just out of a relationship. Mm-hmm. He's still trying to get over it, and you're trying to do him. Yeah. There's no surprise, and if he's not exhibiting signs of hell yeah, I'm game for this as like a rebound or I'm game for this. You don't push it.
No, and the thing is,
I mean, I know that she doesn't necessarily. It's not that she's like mounting him and just getting on with it, but still.
But she's really like, and the thing is, it's not even like the guy at the party has just broken up with his girlfriend. It's like she's literally gone, and he thinks he's never gonna see her again. Like she's, as far as we're concerned, she's dead. So, like, it's like if somebody had just lost their partner, you wouldn't try to be like, oh, how dare you not want to kiss me? Like, you've literally known the guy for not even 12 hours, I would imagine, at this point. And yet, suddenly, you're all over him. It's like, this is the only thing that infuriates me about Martha's character, is the fact that Russell, and I know we've kind of dived into the reason why Russell probably did it before, was probably to give the Doctor more of that grieving period to show that maybe he wasn't just going to bounce from companion to companion.
It's almost just to really hammer home that he's not okay.
Yeah. And also just to hammer home the fact that he's not just going to be falling in love with everybody he meets. But yeah, it's the only thing that I always look at Martha and I think, oh, for God's sake, just get over yourself, girl.
Well, that's something that is going to be interesting going forward in this series, because I know that obviously is referenced very, very explicitly at the end of the series about that, quote unquote thing between Martha and the Doctor. But I don't like, apart from obviously how she's sort of swept off her feet in Smith and Jones, and how there's that scene in the tavern in whatever between the two of them, I don't recall there being. I mean, I say all that much about it. Obviously, later on in the series, towards the end, when the Doctor's talking about how it's like, oh, someone, you're looking right at them and they just can't see you. Mm-hmm. And she looks at Jack and Jack goes, you to her. Like, I'm intrigued to see how many more times that comes up, but it's obviously because it's such an omnipresent thing about the character that it's become that thing that we associate her with. But I'm hoping that looking through this series, because I've always liked Martha personally.
Oh, yeah. I don't dislike her.
Going through the series, it's almost not as omnipresent as we thought. I might be wrong. Because it's been, the beauty of this rewatch is obviously we've stopped ourselves from watching any New Who when we're doing this podcast. I've been back and watched loads of classic stuff, but not anything New Who again, just for the sake of, let's go watch, Stolen Earth and Journey's End again, because I quite like those episodes as like comfort episodes.
But we'll get there eventually.
But yeah, I'm intrigued to see how that plays.
Yeah, I'm hoping that on this rewatch I actually like Martha's character a bit more, because I never disliked her particularly, but she was never somebody that I looked at and thought, yes, I enjoy her as a companion. Whereas I think I actually kind of do when I watch her. It's just these little tidbits like in between that like are a little bit like, oh, come on, really. But again, that's not particularly Martha's fault. Obviously, that's just, that's the way the cookie crumbles and all that jazz. But yeah, I'm hoping that on this rewatch that because we're kind of looking into the characters and analysing a little bit compared to just passively watching, that I might actually think, oh, actually, okay, Martha's character deserves a hell of a lot more credit than she gets. Whereas I somehow don't think the same will be said for Clara. Lol.
Yeah, that's gonna be one that I'm more intrigued to pick apart, and it's one of those things where I'm hoping that either I can change my mind on Martha or I can further re-justify why I didn't like her and why I still don't like her. And discussing it might change. You just said Martha,
do you mean Clara?
Clara, sorry.
I was going to say, you've just established you liked Martha.
Sorry, I thought I said Clara. No. I'm rubbish at this. But yeah, so Shakespeare Code is a good episode, honestly. It's almost one of those ones you can't really... It's a good episode. It's a memorable one. Mm-hmm. But it's not one that you'd write home about, but it's also not one that you would like overlook.
Yeah, it's not
it's sort of there, but it's not... It's like a hidden gem. You go back and watch it and go, actually, yeah, this is actually really good.
I think if I was skipping through Doctor Who on a streaming service, it probably wouldn't be one that I would think, oh yeah, I must go back and watch that episode. But if I was watching it through, like as we are now, I wouldn't skip it. So it's kind of in two camps. It's kind of like it's good, but it's not incredible. Like, there are certain episodes of Doctor Who that I go back to all the time. Like, Amy's Choice is my absolute, probably my favourite ever Doctor Who episode. And, things like that I sort of think, oh, yeah, that's a really good episode. I'll go back and watch that one. This probably wouldn't be one of them, but like I said, I also wouldn't skip it on a rewatch. So...
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, I think... Actually, no. Before I wrap up, Queen Victoria...
Oh,
Queen
yeah.
Elizabeth I, rocking up, and
I really enjoyed that.
Whether that was something that was planned, I'm assuming not. It almost feels like that was written in as probably just a joke to be like, there's, and the fact that obviously Shakespeare just laughs at the fact that Elizabeth I is like, Doctor, my enemy, and the Doctor's like, wait, what?
Time to go.
And I think they could have honestly gotten away with that as a big joke, and I don't think because it was all played off as a joke, I don't think people would be like, tearing their hair out like, what happened between the two, because we don't know, we need to know. It's like, no, you don't. But it took 6 years for that question to be answered as to what that was, and obviously we're not going to spoil it, but that
so
was
good.
I love that they've gone back and put that in, whether that was something that Moffat kept in mind to just do something with, or whether
Russell have a hand in writing the... No, he didn't.
No, it was written by Moffat.
Fair enough.
I mean, I say that. Behind the scenes, I don't know. I mean, because Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat are obviously very good friends. And they do sort of banter each other off on Instagram quite a lot. So it's like, they are friends. So they might have, with Moffat writing for David, they probably did. They must have conversed about it and stuff like that. So maybe, I don't know. But it's just it's a neat little detail that you kind of forget about. And then when it comes back into play in Day of the Doctor, and you go,
that's why Queen Elizabeth hates it.
Yeah. And I love that. It's such a cool little thing. And I almost forget that happened. And as soon as they're running going, she's here, it's like, oh my God, it's this bit. So a lot to like in the Shakespeare Code, especially Christina Cole. So
who?
The hot witch.
The witch. Okay.
Yeah. That's the main one.
I said to you, didn't I? I was like, they probably couldn't afford prosthetics for 3 of them at all times during the show, so they just went, we'll just leave the hot one without them on.
I was going to say, it's like, why would you get like such an attractive actress and be like, yeah, let's stick her behind prosthetics the whole time? Admittedly, they put, I can never say her name right. She played the Rani in Sarah Jane Adventures and played the queen of the Skithra in the Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror.
Oh, yeah.
She's very, very hot. And dating Sacha Dhawan, fun fact. It's like Angie Mahindra, something like that.
I'm not even going to try.
I cannot pronounce her name. But either way, it's like, yeah, let's get someone really hot, just stick them on those prosthetics. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But
yeah, why not?
Anyway, so that was the Shakespeare Code. And next up is Gridlock. We're going back to New Earth. The Doctor's very much not over Rose because he's like, let's go back to this place. Admittedly, there is a reason why. He doesn't just take her back on a jolly, but... And also featuring an enemy that obviously back in the day, because it was a semi-unknown, it wasn't an iconic enemy, but a second Doctor enemy that comes back in that, which, was something that I didn't really realise. I remember quizzing my parents about, hey, do you remember there being a woman stretched across a frame in classic Doctor Who? And they were like, Nope. So, giant crabs, who knew? Anyway, that's going to be next time as we head back to New York for Gridlock.
Hey.
And you get to look at David Tennant cuddling some kittens.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Cute overload.
If you've got any questions regarding Gridlock, then please do send them to us on Twitter at Kasterpod, Kasterpod. It's in the description of the podcast that you're listening to right now, or in the description of the video if you're watching the video version, because they're back.
Because we
And they
put
take
them on
like
YouTube
three,
now.
They take like 3 hours to render, so you're welcome. But yeah, send us your questions on Twitter. But speaking of Twitter and social media, Amy Pass, where can they find you?
You can find me at Ames_Elizabeth on
If you go,
basically all social media, except for the fact that I don't really use Twitter that much. So Instagram's
Yeah.
probably the best.
and you can find me on Twitter at PickupChangeToe. If you do find the Kasterpod account, our names are actually atted in the bio now, which I didn't do before, but they're there now as well.
Genius.
And if you that's the same for Instagram as well. If you want to find me on Twitch, because I'm streaming on Twitch again, I'm back on it finally after quite a spotty sort of few months because of work and mental health and stuff. I'm on Twitch at Rich's Live, so why not come along and say hi? I'm playing 2 Point Hospital at the moment, and it's hilarious. I love it. But yeah, that is that. Thank you all very much for listening. We will see you next time in Gridlock. Until we see you again, take care of yourselves.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.